I always knew I wasn't meant to live in a place where someone else told me what color my front door could be. Growing up in the suburbs, I had a front row seat to the mind-numbing pettiness of an HOA. In this neighborhood, every house looked like a cookie-cutter replica, where neighbors nodded in polite acknowledgement but never truly spoke. It wasn't a bad place, just sterile, controlled, lifeless. My first real taste of HOA absurdity came when I was a kid. One morning, my dad forgot to bring the trash bins on time. The HOA left us a $50 fine because the garbage cans were out 5 minutes past pickup. My father, a man who rarely lost his temper, fumed as he tossed the notice onto the kitchen counter like a traffic ticket. That was the first time I realized how ridiculous it all was. Over the years, I saw more absurd fines handed out, a garden hose not rolled up the approved way, a mailbox one shade too dark, and someone getting a violation notice because their grass was a quarter-inch too long. I hated it. I swore that when I finally had my own place, I'd never live under an HOA's thumb. That dream started when I first visited my grandfather's farm. Unlike our suburban prison, his land was free, open skies, rolling fields, and a front porch where we could sit in peace, watching the sunset paint the horizon in oranges and purples. There were no perfectly trimmed lawns, no matching mailboxes, no HOA letters taped to his door. It was just land, sky, and freedom. I wanted that for myself. But dreams and reality didn't always line up. Like every responsible adult, I followed the expected path: college, a business degree, an office job, and a small apartment in the city. It was fine. I had a coffee shop downstairs, a gym within walking distance, and a grocery store around the corner. Everything was convenient. And yet, I felt trapped. My life was confined to a concrete box, waking up to the sound of traffic instead of birds. Every day was the same, commuting in crowded subway cars, working in a soulless cubicle, staring at spreadsheets that meant nothing to me. Then I'd go home, microwave dinner, sleep, and repeat. It was suffocating. I started reading books about people who had escaped, homesteaders, off-grid adventurers, farmers who left it all behind. I devoured memoirs of people who built cabins with their own hands, who grew their own food, who didn't answer to landlords or HOA boards. So, I started planning. I created a folder on my computer called Escape Plan. Every extra dollar went into a savings account. No vacations, no expensive nights out. Just one goal: buy land and get out. And then, one day, I found it. The listing was simple. Farmhouse. 3-bedroom. Barn. 10 acres. Needs work. The moment I saw the pictures, I knew. The house was old but sturdy. The barn was weathered but solid. The land stretched out in every direction, wild and uncontained. Most importantly, it wasn't part of an HOA. I didn't hesitate. I scheduled a visit and drove out to see it in person, and the second I stepped onto that land, I knew this was it. Freedom. I bought it. Signing the papers was the best feeling in the world. For the first time, I owned something that was truly mine. No HOA rules, no nosy board members, no letters telling me how to live. And for a few glorious months, it was everything I had dreamed of. Then came the letter. At first, I thought it was junk mail, some scam trying to sell me an extended car warranty. But as I skimmed the letter, my stomach dropped. It was a violation notice from an HOA, which made no sense, because I wasn't in an HOA. Apparently, I had committed multiple infractions. Unapproved paint color, grass too tall, barn visible from the street, unauthorized livestock ownership. I had 2 goats. 2. The final line was what really got me. Failure to comply will result in daily fines and possible legal action. I read it twice, trying to make sense of it. This had to be a mistake. So I did the only logical thing. I called them. That was my first mistake. The moment I got Natalie, the HOA president, on the phone, I realized 2 things. This wasn't a mistake. She wasn't backing down. Our records indicate that your property falls within the HOA's jurisdiction, she said, her voice clipped and professionally condescending. That's funny, I replied, keeping my tone light. Because my deed says otherwise. A long pause. Sir, she sighed like I was an idiot wasting her time. All properties in this area must adhere to HOA guidelines. That's great and all, I said, but again, I'm not in your HOA. Her tone sharpened. Refusal to comply will result in escalating fines and legal action. And that's when I realized. This was war. The next day, I got another letter. This one wasn't just a violation notice. It was fine. Since I hadn't corrected my infractions, I now owed $50 per day until I complied. By the end of the week, it was $200 per day. It was like some kind of extortion racket. Then they showed up. One afternoon, while repainting my fence, I noticed a group of HOA board members standing at the edge of my property. 4 of them, clipboards in hand, whispering, pointing at my house. I walked over, gripping the paintbrush like a weapon. Can I help you? I asked, though what I really wanted to say was, are you lost? A balding guy with tiny glasses cleared his throat. We're conducting a compliance check. Compliance for what? I crossed my arms. For the HOA regulations. I laughed in his face. I'm not in your HOA. His frown deepened. Our records say otherwise. Well, your records are wrong. The woman next to him smirked. Noncompliance will result in escalating fines. If unpaid, a lien can be placed on your property. Eventually, it could be foreclosed upon. I exhaled slowly. These people were insane. And I had just one response. Try me. If the HOA thought they could intimidate me into submission, they were about to learn just how wrong they were. The morning after their so-called compliance check, I woke up to find a brand new violation notice taped to my front door. This one was even more absurd than the last. New violations. Unauthorized fencing structure. My fence had been there for years. Excessive noise from livestock. My goats weren't even loud. Improper waste disposal. A fancy way of saying they didn't like my compost bin. At the bottom, in bold, was the threat I had been expecting. Failure to comply will result in legal action and property liens. I stared at the paper, my anger simmering. All right, HOA. If it's a war you want, it's a war you'll get. First, I needed backup. I called my lawyer, David Caldwell, a man who lived for cases like this. HOA harassment, he said, intrigued. Sounds like my kind of fight. Send me everything. By the afternoon, David had filed a formal cease and desist letter to the HOA, warning them that any further contact would result in a harassment lawsuit. That should have been the end of it. It wasn't. The next day, I came home to find a tow truck in my driveway, attaching itself to my pickup truck. I stormed out. Hey, what the hell do you think you're doing? The driver barely looked at me. Order from the HOA. Says your vehicle is abandoned and in violation of community guidelines. I pointed to the registration sticker. It's licensed, insured, and on my property. Drop it. Now. Before he could argue, I pulled out my phone and dialed the sheriff's office. Yeah, this is Alex Carter. I need an officer out here. Somebody's trying to steal my truck. The moment I said steal, the driver jumped into his truck and sped off. I smirked. They were getting desperate. That night, I decided to go on the offensive. First, I printed flyers about the HOA's harassment and went door to door. Did you know they're illegally trying to find non-members? I asked my neighbors. Turns out, I wasn't the only one sick of them. Within 2 days, I had over 30 signatures from homeowners demanding the HOA step down or dissolve. And then came my favorite part, public exposure. I contacted a local news station and tipped them off about an HOA illegally fining a homeowner who wasn't even part of the association. By the weekend, my story was on the evening news. And the HOA? They were drowning in bad press. The moment the story aired, everything changed. The board members started resigning one by one, afraid of legal action. Natalie, the HOA president, went into hiding, refusing to speak to reporters. Then came the lawsuit. David filed a harassment and defamation case against the HOA on my behalf. When we dug deeper, we found misappropriated funds, illegal fines, and forged documents. By the time we were done, the entire HOA was dismantled. And as for Natalie, she was personally fined for harassment and ordered to pay damages. For the first time in months, I could wake up and drink my coffee without checking for new threats taped to my door. The HOA was gone, and my land was truly mine. As I sat on my porch, watching the sunset over my fields, I smirked. They tried. They failed. And I won.